Well, hey there, everyone. This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Excited that you're here. In this video, I'm going to be sharing some music production tips while recreating the beat in the weekends in your eyes. So let's dive right in. Let's start by listening to the finished product. All right, so let's go ahead and focus in on the drums. Let's start by just double clicking this clip slot here in the session view window with the drum rack. And I have a drum rack here loaded with a couple sounds. And so I'm going to go ahead and draw in our pattern. Let's start with the kick pattern, just doing this basic 4 on the floor. And let's draw in our snare on the 2 and on the 4. And so we'll just repeat this process. I'll just highlight this with the snare and hit Apple or Command D to duplicate. Now I also want to layer the snare with a clap that we have here with a reverb inserted on there. I'll focus some attention on that in a little bit. But just by clicking that whole snare row, you see the dotted little lines show up. That means you're selecting all the elements in this row. That would be the snare drum. While all of them are now highlighted, just holding the Option key, click and drag up to any other sound. Now, what we're going to do here is have 2 hi-hats, but dedicated to one pattern. And what I mean by that is I'm going to draw the hi-hat pattern out. So let's decrease the grid amount, the subdivision, because if I draw on the hi-hat, it's going to be the same as the kick drum. That's every quarter note. So we want to do it half that length right here. Okay, so what we hear is that kind of little galloping type of vibe. So I'm going to use one hi-hat to sustain the 8th note here, that top one, and then you use a second hi-hat to create a more distinct rhythm with a lesser subdivision. So let's click this right here. So you see that, because what's happening is if I would have used this hi-hat, and which we could have done, we could have done the same thing. I want the texture from the first hi-hat to be the same, and I want to kind of treat this one a little bit differently. So we have, this one's a little bit brighter, and this one is a little bit like, it's a little duller and a little tin. And this just gives some good contrast from both of the sounds and adds a nice little texture to it. So you can try this in your projects. It's a really cool thing to have 2 distinct sounds, but yet focus for one specific pattern. So now what I'll do is, and do the same thing here. And then let's just go ahead and add that again here until we get like 1 bar of that. And I'll just copy this over. And as I open up the drum rack here to kind of just set the balance of everything, you can see that I have the smaller, that thinner, or the hi-hat on the bottom. Just a little lower, so it gets the 8th note hi-hat, just feels a little bit more accented. And as I mentioned, that clap here, we have a reverb inserted directly on there. And I'm just playing around with it until I get a nice little tail end with that. And now I'm making the decision more so when I'm balancing everything else, the bass line and the pads and all that stuff. And then I start to balance up a little bit more reverb. And we'll also send a little reverb to the drums in total here as well. So I've got the reverb on send A. And that gives a nice dimension and space. It really helps the drums add some life to that performance. So here we have just a regular stock big room reverb preset from Ableton Live. Make sure that that's at 100%. And we'll play around with that as we add the bass line, the pads, because we might want to feel a little bit more of the reverb. So I'll leave it there for now. And then on the drum rack, we're going to insert an EQ. I'm using the channel EQ here. I'm going to enable that. And that's going to boost up a little bit of the low end, take away some of the mids, and just not even a dB of the highs. Let's just go ahead and mess around with this. This just gives a nice boost in the bottom end there. And saturation is such a great thing to add to these drums because it adds really nice harmonics and kind of helps glue everything up together. It gives it a little bit more bite. And then I'm using a compressor here just to go ahead and create more punch by allowing the compressor to just bring up a little bit of the transients at the beginning of the kick and snare and all the drums together. But you notice something different here. I'm choosing, instead of the peak, the RMS. So this is, instead of focusing on the initial peak of each transient, I'm doing the average. So this is going to be this is going to treat the compressor to react a lot slower than, let's say, the peak. So this is just going to be a lot more subtle, and the peak will be a bit more drastic. And then we'll use an EQ to just carve out a little bit of the tone. I'm taking some high end here to make the drums feel a little bit warmer. And then another saturator. Now, I also like to incorporate loops on top of my programmed drums just to give a bit more life and energy to them. So I'm going to incorporate this loop here. Just click, drag, and drop that into another audio track, and let's see what this sounds like together. So we're going to do a couple little things just to kind of help tuck this out of the way. It really just focus on the feel that the loop gives rather than the attention to the loop away from the main program drums. So here we have this. Let's go ahead and EQ a lot of the low mids and just want to focus in on that highs right here. That's also going to help get rid of this little, which is kind of cool. I like that, but we'll just focus on that energy right over here. And then just a little bit, because I like the feel that the shaker and even all the little artifacts in there. I really do like the texture of that and putting that with the drums. And then I'm going to use the compressor for the purpose of sidechaining. So the sidechain is going to allow an audio source to trigger, or may really allow this signal to duck out of the way. So let's click sidechain here, and I want this to come from the kick drum. So every time the kick drum plays, I want the loop to kind of duck out of the way. So audio from, let's go into the drum rack. What item inside the drum rack? Well, the kick. There you go. And then just lower the threshold to taste. All right, let's see what that sounds like. This is without the loop. Cool, see how it adds that life into the loop? I'll take it off again. All right, now let's go ahead and focus in on the bass line. So for this, I'm going to be using Serum. So let's go ahead and take a listen to the bass line. And let's go into Serum and do a couple tweaking. So here we have a sawtooth set to oscillator 1. And let's just immediately bring it down an octave. So I'll click octave, lower it down. And let's do some detuning. So we'll go to the unison box over here and we'll crank this up to 7. And there's a couple key features here that it's embedded in Serum that drew me to wanting to use this as opposed to any other synth right now for this specific type of bass line. So we're going to bring the detune down. And then let's enable oscillator B. So we'll leave oscillator B an octave up. And maybe just finally detune this one. So we'll go over here. then let's run oscillator A and B over to this filter by enabling that and then choosing oscillator A and B to be affected by the filter. So we're going to give a little bit of filter drive. So that gives some nice harmonic distortion in for the filter, and fatten this up a little bit. And then I'm going to turn on the sub, the actual sub harmonic there as well. So we get a nice beefy bottom end. And now the shaping of the sound is really going to come from the envelope here, envelope 2. So let's click envelope 2, drag that over the cutoff. We want the envelope to shape how the filter is going to react to the sound. So bringing this down, let's adjust, clicking this little, the little modulation knob on top of the cutoff. Let's just decrease that a little bit. And then head over here to the envelope and shape that out. So let's go ahead start by bringing the sustain down, probably around here, and then messing around with the decay. And then bringing the release up a little bit. So it gives that nice little chunky, plucky type of bass sound right here when you're starting to shape this envelope. So it's gonna I like where it's at right now. I'm gonna click and drag LFO1. The reason why I'm doing this is because I also want to modulate, add some movement while this, just modulate this and adds a little bit of movement to that. So we'll add LFO1, but we're gonna control that a little bit. So let's click that modulation wheel and just send a little bit, and then bring this down, and let's lower this to every 2 bars and take the anchor off so that it's just continuously moving. Every 2 bars, it's going to modulate. And then within the effects rack here, we're going to turn in the hyper and the unison mix here. And then drop that mix down a little bit, and maybe just a little bit of dimension. And some distortion on there. I'm just going to shape the LFO just a little bit. And then what I want to do is set it to mono. Because we are dealing with a bass line, I don't want any overlapping with the notes. And I'm going to just tweak up the portamento a little bit so that we have a nice little glide from one note to the other. All right, let's see what that sounds like with the drums. And now let's do the same thing that we did with the loop. I'm going to hold the Option key, click and drag that over to the serum as well. And that's just going to make a copy of the sidechain because I'm going to be getting the sidechain from the same source. So then I might want to just open up that filter a little bit just to brighten up the sound. I think I actually want to widen it up a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to the serum effects and crank up the mix. Once I heard it with the drums, I wanted to take up a little bit more space stereo-wise. All right, next we have those cool little chord stabs that are happening that really play well with the bass line. So for this, I'm going to use Ableton Live's wavetable. Click and drag that to our MIDI track. Now let's check out the chords. So it's definitely got a brighter tone to it. And if I was to visualize, and this is a really good, helpful tool when you're trying to capture sounds or recreate the sounds you hear in your head, or just try to mimic stuff that you're listening to that you really want to add to your music. Just visualize it. It's been helpful for me. So I've got this elastic, rubbery type of sound, this wah, wah, right? So definitely, we just heard the sine wave, a little too dull for that. So let's start with a sawtooth because we can shape that tone and kind of get that elastic wah, wah type of feel off a sawtooth. So now I've got this first oscillator on sawtooth 1. Let's bring the filter down. Let's shape the actual character. So with the amp envelope, I don't want the tail of every note to linger. So let's bring the release down. And then what we want to do is set oscillator 2 on, same thing, sawtooth, but let's put this an octave higher. Cool little organ type of thing, right? Now, similar to what we did with the serum, let's go ahead and map our envelope to the filter so that we can tweak and modulate that filter every time the notes are being performed. So we'll go to the matrix here. Whoa. And then we're going to click filter frequency and we're going to choose envelope 2. Let's just try this out, see how this works. So we want more of that what, like that swell. So let's shape this envelope here. So now let's go ahead and adjust this. So I'm going to, in envelope 2, just adjust some of the settings here to shape the actual filter envelope. Let's bring this down. Probably right there. Let's now move the decay down. And then the little wah effect will come from the attack. Right there, sounds good. And then we'll bring this down as well. And then let's just add a little resonance, just create a nice little peak there. That's what gives it that nice sharp vibe to it. And then enable the second filter here. You can also use an EQ to do this, but I'm just going to shave some of the low end off. And then let's add some filter drive to this as well. There you go. And then put the unison on, classic mode. How about noise? And I'm going to just blend that second octave. Bring the volume of oscillator 2 down a little bit. All right. And now let's just really quickly, let me just gauge this with everything else. So I want a little bit more width. So I'm going to go grab a chorus, put that right after that. And then let's go ahead and grab the sidechain. I realized that I got to put the drum rack and the kick. And I'll do the same thing. I think I forgot to do that here as well. So we're sidechaining these, both the bass line and the chords. Now let's use another wavetable here from Ableton Live to create the nice chord pads that we have going on throughout the chorus. Now I'm doing this by using two sawtooth oscillators, but we're just filtering them out. And we're shaping the amp envelope. We're giving a little bit more release, so we've got that nice tail end of all the notes once they're played. So let's go ahead and check out the chords. So this one's pretty straightforward. It's very simple. Just the two oscillators set here, and then we're just filtering them out. And they're really going to add that nice lush body to what we have so far. But let's give it some more atmosphere. So we're going to go to the audio effects, reverb, just directly insert a reverb on there. Bring down the dry and wet. Mess a little bit with the low cut input processing, and then an EQ. So let me open up the filter just a little bit. All right, next, let's go ahead and focus on the main melody lead that we hear in the chorus. So for this, I'm going to use Ableton Live's analog. I'm going to click, drag, and drop that here. And let's just take a listen to the melody. All right, so we're not far off, right? It definitely has the right type of tone. So we're going to leave it at sawtooth here. We're going to do a little bit of tweaking here. So let's just detune this slightly. Let's go down a little. And we're detuning this against oscillator 2 here. So oscillator 2 we'll leave, and also just detune slightly as well. And then let's go ahead over here to the filter and bring this down. Give it a little bit more resonance. And I'm going to go to the amp envelope and open up the release a little bit because we want some more of that tail. Now, what I'm going to do is also cause some modulation. So there's some movement in there. And this is what gives a nice little vintage feel, but more of that 80s type of feel when there's that detuning modulation happening. So go to oscillator 1 and let's go ahead, enable LFO 1 here in oscillator 1. Now let's just send a little bit to that. Well, I'll send a lot so you can hear what it's doing. Right? So it's just bending the pitch way too much. So let's just bring that down. Cool. And now let's actually put the unison on so we can just cause a little bit more detuning globally. And I'm going to put the vibrato on and increase the rate here. So this is actually going to cause some cool little, vibrato to the sound. Okay, now what we can do is go ahead and color this up a little bit. So let's add a chorus. And a chorus effect is, man, it's one of the most prominent effects that are being used on synths, during these synth wave and 80s type of tunes. So using a lot of chorus here to capture the sound. And then let's go ahead. Well, actually, before the chorus, why don't we actually put some delay? Let's put a delay before the chorus here and set this to every eighth note here. All right, and then after the chorus and delay, let's give some space and dimension using a reverb here. And just leaving it the way it is, stock. Let's just pull the dry and wet back. I'm going to take some of the low end process, so just basically filtering out the low end before it's going in to the reverb, and just a little bit of the high end, just a warmer reverb. And then I'm using the utility plugin here in Ableton Live to actually give some stereo depth. So here we have the width knob, and I'm just going to slightly increase that. And then let me go ahead and send a little bit of that to the reverb that we have on return track A. I'm also making sure that I'm sending a couple other items like the bass line, the drum loop. I'm sending a lot of that, and we'll send a little bit of the drums as well. This is just going to give just a little bit more touch of atmosphere and create some dimension in there. So let's see everything else together. well, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful for you, and it really is my pleasure to help you take your next step with your music production while making these videos. So if you want to stay up to date with upcoming videos and ways that I can do that, just simply hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you would like the sounds in this session, as well as the Ableton Live session, but even if you're not using Ableton Live, let me show you how you can access the sounds to follow along. You simply download, just click the link below in the description box, or you can visit beatacademy.com/pack. And in there, you'll find not only a construction kit filled with loops, one-shots, transition effects, a whole bunch of sounds that you can use royalty-free. You can also find this session. So once you download once you put your email, send it directly into your inbox. Be sure to check your spam so it's not lost in there. Then once you download the file, be sure to unzip it and look for the session. If you use Ableton Live, you'll be able to open up the session. But if you don't, you can look for the sounds by hitting the samples and look for all the imported and recorded sounds in there. And you could just simply click, drag and drop, and use them in your DAW. Hey, once again, thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.